Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There is a hunger that moves in silence. It does not roar like a space marine charging into battle, nor chant like the zealots of the ecclesiarchy. It moves across stars like a shadow across the soul, devouring not merely life, but meaning. This is the Tyranid threat. Not a race, not a people, but a cosmic force of such relentless purpose that it mocks every attempt at understanding. They do not parley, they do not conquer, they consume. And in their wake, nothing remains, not even memory. Yet behind this horror lies a deeper terror. Not that they are unstoppable, but that we do not truly know what they are. They are not of this galaxy. They are not part of the great games played by gods and monsters in the warp. They are alien in a way nothing else in Warhammer 40,000 is. They are the anti-narrative, the devourers of myth. But what if they are not merely invaders from the void? What if they are a part of us, of our story, far older than we dare imagine? There are whispers in the void, hushed, heretical theories traded in the blackest corners of forbidden archives. The idea that the Tyranids are not new at all, that they were not born but made, forged long ago by the very beings who shaped the stars, the old ones. Perhaps they were a final gamble, a contingency plan. Or worse, a mistake that could not be undone. What if the Tyranids are not the end, but the beginning? Not the destroyers of life, but its first and most pure children? Children left in the dark, hungry and forgotten, until the stars called them home. Now we look into that darkness, not to escape it, but to understand it. For if the Tyranids are the firstborn of the old ones, then their hunger is not alien at all. It is ancestral, and it may be the fate of all life to feed the first children of the gods. Before there were the Imperium's endless wars, before even the rise of the Eldari or the Necron, there were the old ones. They are the origin of myth and the foundation of tragedy, ancient beings of such profound power that their very existence shaped the structure of the galaxy. The old ones were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were gardeners, sculptors of life, architects of destiny. With mastery over the warp and an understanding of genetics beyond anything even the Mechanicus dares dream, they seeded worlds, uplifted species, and wove psychic harmony across countless systems. They made the galaxy teem with life, not for conquest, but for balance, harmony through multiplicity, diversity as strength. They were gods of a benevolent kind, or at least that was the intent. But divinity bears the seeds of hubris, and their gifts came at a cost. To create sentience was to unleash ambition. To spread psychic sensitivity was to open doors to the warp's nightmare realm. And as their creations grew, orcs, Krork, Eldar, the Slan, the Jokero, and others now long forgotten, so too did the complexity of the game the Old Ones played. It wasn't a game of dominance, but of equilibrium. The Old Ones did not build an empire. They built a mechanism, a galactic ecosystem where countless species would check and balance each other, guided subtly by their Slan agents and psychic webways. Yet even in their mastery, the Old Ones could not see all ends. They had built a stage so vast, so intricate, that a single crack in the foundation would unleash calamity, and that crack came in the form of rebellion. The Necron, born into a short, painful life beneath a cancerous star, viewed the Old Ones not as gods, but as cruel jailers. In their desperation and bitterness, they struck a bargain with entities beyond comprehension, star vampires, the Khitan. They shed their flesh and became Necrons, gaining immortality at the cost of their souls. With weapons of impossible physics and minds unburdened by emotion, they waged the war in heaven, and the galaxy burned. The Old Ones, with all their wisdom, were outmaneuvered, outgunned, and ultimately undone. In the chaos, the Old Ones made one last attempt to preserve what they could. Some say they fled the galaxy entirely, withdrawing into higher dimensions. Others whisper that they were annihilated, devoured by their own creations. But there is another theory, one rarely spoken, even among the most heretical thinkers. What if the Old Ones, seeing the collapse of their grand experiment, turned their talents not toward escape, but vengeance, or perhaps more chillingly, toward continuity? Imagine this. A race of beings capable of designing an entire ecosystem could surely design something more focused, more ruthless. A failsafe, a biological construct not to preserve balance, but to reset it. What if, before the last of the Slan temples fell, before the final node of the webway was lost, the Old Ones enacted a final protocol? Not a guardian, but a reaper. Not a balance, but an erasure. Life had become tainted, the cycle broken. Perhaps the galaxy needed not another beginning, but a final end. And so the idea emerges like a worm in the dark. The Tyranids may not be an outside threat at all. They may be the ultimate creation of the Old Ones, not their legacy, but their vengeance. Perfectly evolved, endlessly adaptable, psychically attuned, yet resistant to warp corruption. A biotechnological force designed not to conquer or rule, but to consume, to wipe the slate clean. If this is true, then the Tyranids are not new to the galaxy. They are ancient. Sent away across the void, hidden from the ruin of the war in heaven, to one day return when all was lost. Not children abandoned, but tools buried, awaiting activation. The Old Ones were masters of life. But even the wisest gardener may one day grow a seed they cannot control. The war in heaven was not a war in the way the Imperium understands it. It was not a conflict fought with fleets and ground armies, not simply a struggle over territory or ideology. It was apocalyptic in every sense, a clash of primordial entities whose battles reshaped the laws of physics, tore holes in reality, and scarred the warp itself. At the heart of this epoch-shattering conflict were the Old Ones and the Necrons, but what followed in its wake was more terrifying than the war itself. A shattered galactic order, the collapse of ancient networks, and the scattering of powerful artifacts and species across time and space. The galaxy was never the same again. The Old Ones had relied on a delicate web of control. Their influence over the warp, their psychic infrastructure, and their careful manipulation of countless species was all designed to maintain a kind of cosmic stability. But as the Necrons surged forward with their soulless armies and unleashed the Citan, star gods that fed upon the warp's energies, this balance was irrevocably destroyed. The psychic network collapsed. Entire species fell into madness. The carefully constructed ecological and psychic web of the Old Ones unraveled strand by strand. In the madness of this collapse, the Old Ones tried to adapt. They accelerated the development of new psychic races, most notably the Eldari, hoping to field weapons that could match the immaterial threat posed by the Catan and Necrons. But their attempts came too late. The Necrons had already devastated the ecosystems the Old Ones had spent millions of years cultivating. And worst of all, the warp itself had begun to change. The agony of countless dying civilizations, the psychic death throes of unbalanced creation, and the raw psychic feedback from a galaxy-wide war gave rise to warp storms, daemons, and proto-chaos entities that twisted reality further. The Old Ones, being so intrinsically tied to the warp, were undone not just by their enemies, but by the failure of their own masterpiece. But what if this catastrophe did not merely end the era of the Old Ones? What if it was the catalyst for something darker? We know the Old Ones were masters of genetic manipulation. We know they could seed life across entire star systems. And we know they fought with tools as much biological as they were psychic. So in their final moments, amidst the collapse of their ancient empire, did they send something away? Something incomplete, or perhaps embryonic? Not another warrior race, not another psychic beacon, but a biological recursion engine. A hunger given flesh. The galaxy's destruction may have demanded more than mere survival. It may have demanded reformatting, a full-scale biological reset, not unlike the mythic floods in ancient Terran cultures where the gods wiped the slate clean so that something new could grow in its place. Could the Tyranids be this flood? Not a new force, but a sleeping one, set adrift beyond the galactic rim, too dangerous to be used then, too necessary to be destroyed? There is evidence, whispers in Xeno's linguistic archives and forbidden Necron data crypts, that some force left the galaxy intentionally at the end of the war in heaven. Something designed yet directionless, a system of consumption rather than creation. And across millions of years, it evolved. It became faster, stronger, smarter. It absorbed worlds and other galaxies, refining its methods. Perhaps it forgot its purpose. Or perhaps it never had to remember. It only had to obey its prime directive: consume all biological matter, absorb genetic diversity, leave no survivors. The horror of this idea is not that the Tyranids are evil. It is that they are perfect. They have no emotion, no cruelty. They do not hate. They are the end result of the Old One's logic pushed to its most terrible conclusion. What better way to end a failed creation than to unleash a force that can never be stopped, never be reasoned with, and never be sated? The Necrons went into stasis to avoid the future they helped create. The Eldari fell into hedonism and eventual damnation. The Imperium builds walls and calls it safety, but the Tyranids do not fear what is to come. They are what is to come. The Tyranids are not simply creatures of tooth and claw. They are biology made divine. Their very existence defies the known rules of evolutionary development. No other race adapts with such terrifying precision, nor weaponizes its own genetic code with such brutal artistry. Every aspect of the Tyranid organism is engineered to serve a purpose. There is no waste, no redundancy, no morality, only function, only hunger. And yet the question lingers: who or what created such a monstrosity of efficiency? Consider their bodies. Each Tyranid is a living weapon, bred for a specific role within the swarm. Some fly, some tunnel, some spread spores, others emit psychic signals or act as nodes in the hive mind's vast synaptic network. The diversity is staggering, yet it is not random. It is engineered. Their genomes are modular, able to incorporate DNA from any consumed life form, allowing them to evolve not across generations, but between battles. This is not natural selection. This is directed evolution, weaponized adaptation, like code rewritten mid-combat. Then there is their technology, if one can call it that. The Tyranids use no metal, no electricity, no machines as we understand them. Their ships are living entities, vast biomechanical constructs that grow, feed, and reproduce. They warp space not through gellar fields or plasma drives, but by warping themselves, swimming through the void like enormous predators. Their weapons are symbiotic organisms that fire bony projectiles, acidic globs, or even parasites that eat the enemy from within. This is not innovation, it is integration. Biology elevated to infrastructure, and all of it is controlled by the hive mind. The hive mind is not a central brain, nor a god in the warp. It is something stranger, a gestalt consciousness formed by the collective minds of all Tyranids, directed toward a single, overriding goal: consumption. The smaller creatures are guided by larger synapse beings, which in turn are coordinated by larger nodes, all feeding into the incomprehensible intelligence of the hive mind. It is like a neural web stretched across light years, a sentient ecosystem made of billions of linked thoughts. When the hive mind focuses on a system, the warp screams. Psychic communication dies. Sanity crumbles. It is not just a biological force, it is psychic annihilation given presence. The paradox is chilling. How did such a system arise in nature? The level of integrated biological and psychic design exhibited by the Tyranids surpasses anything else in the galaxy, even the techno-sorcery of the Necrons, or the soul-forging of the Eldari. It suggests not only intelligent design, but a level of biotechnological mastery we have no comparison for. Evolution doesn't build superorganisms that function as fleets. It doesn't create weapon animals that self-replicate with precision. It doesn't produce ships that are born, feed, and die. This leads us back to the old ones. If they were capable of creating the Krork, war beasts bred for endless combat, and the Eldari, refined psychic conduits, then why not a third axis? A living ecosystem engineered to consume. The Tyranids may not be an accident or even a failed weapon. They may be the perfected iteration of everything the old ones had learned. Not a race, but a system. A recursive, evolving biotechnological solution to a problem they could no longer fix. A way to erase and begin again. There are rumors, uncorroborated, buried, suppressed, of ancient Slan ruins bearing carvings that resemble Tyranid bioforms. Stylized wings, chitinous bodies, even early representations of synapse creatures. These glyphs are dismissed by the Ordo Xenos as misinterpretations, but the suggestion is there. The Tyranids may have existed before the fall. Perhaps even before the war. And here lies the horror. If the Tyranids are a biotechnological artifact, then they are not invaders, but inheritors. They may not be an aberration, but a conclusion. Their presence is not an error in the galactic equation, but its final answer. The hive mind is a paradox wrapped in terror. It is both everywhere and nowhere, a psychic presence that exists in the minds of trillions, yet is greater than the sum of its parts. To behold it psychically is to stare into a living god made of instinct and will. And when it arrives, it is not through the physical alone. The first sign is always silence. The warp goes still. Astropaths scream and die. The veil of reality trembles as the shadow in the warp falls. And yet, for all its might, the hive mind is unlike any warp-based entity we have ever known. It consumes psychic energy, but is not of chaos. It manipulates the warp, but is not corrupted by it. It is anathema to the demonic, and that, perhaps, is the greatest clue to its origin. The warp is a psychic reflection of emotion, desire, and consciousness. Chaos thrives on passion and corruption. But the Tyranids? They possess no souls in the traditional sense, no individual identity, no desire beyond the hive mind's singular will. Their minds are nodes, not hearts. They are immune to corruption, not because they resist it, but because they are incompatible with it. This is not a natural evolution. This is design, the kind of deliberate shaping only the old ones could have managed. Imagine the purpose behind such creation: a species that can interface with the warp, but not be consumed by it. A living firewall against demonic influence. A race that can traverse the warp, disrupt it, even blind the Imperium psychics, yet remain utterly untouched by its madness. What better tool could the old ones have devised, at the height of their desperation, than a biological entity that defied the very foundations of the enemy's power? And this is where the theory takes on a haunting shape. What if the hive mind is not simply a psychic phenomenon that evolved? What if it is the product of Old One engineering, an artificial warp presence designed to operate parallel to chaos, yet insulated from its influence? The shadow in the warp could be more than an effect. It could be a function, a deliberate suppression field, a kind of psionic dead zone emanated by the Tyranid presence to sterilize warp activity in the area. Not as a side effect, but as a targeted protocol. A memory of the war in heaven made manifest. There are scattered records, fragmented Eldari myths, corrupted Necron memory seals that speak of a great unthought, a force that moved across the stars in silence, absorbing all psychic resonance and leaving only a blank void. It was not demonic, not soulless, but something other, something that devoured meaning itself. Could this have been an early form of the hive mind? A prototype released during the final days of the war in heaven? Or was it a ghost? A foreshadowing of what was to come? We must also consider the way the hive mind scales. It is not bound by planetary limits. The more it consumes, the stronger it becomes, not just biologically but psychically. It grows in depth and breadth, gaining not merely strength but complexity. It is evolution on a cognitive level. This too feels deliberate. A system that becomes more intelligent with each conquest, building not only stronger warriors but a more capable central intelligence. It is not growth for growth's sake. It is convergence toward something final. And unlike the chaos gods who exist in feedback loops of mortal emotion, the hive mind needs nothing from others. It does not tempt, lie, or barter. It does not feed on sin. It feeds on life itself. This makes it in some ways more terrifying. It has no morality, no ideology, no seduction. Only purpose, a singular, overwhelming will to consume all. Not out of hate, but out of hunger, or perhaps out of programming. In the end, the hive mind may be the closest thing the galaxy has to a perfect machine god. A being of pure function, free from emotion, insulated from corruption, focused solely on a task. Whether that task is an ancient command from a long-dead master, or a directive evolved beyond its original scope, we may never know. But the signs point to intention, to creation, to something that was not born, but made. Beyond the edge of the galaxy, where no astropath's scream can reach and the Emperor's light dims into nothingness, something stirs. It is not a fleet. It is not a civilization. It is a hunger given direction, a tide of flesh and bone and synapse that surges in from the black. The Tyranids did not evolve here. They came from somewhere else. But from where? And why now? These are the questions that plague the Inquisition and haunt the nightmares of the Ordo Xenos. Yet there is one theory that dares to answer them, one whispered in the hush of dead star systems and among shattered worlds. What if the Tyranids did not simply wander into our galaxy by chance? What if they were summoned? Throughout the Imperium, strange patterns have been noted, long-dead Xenos civilizations erased in an instant, as if by a sudden storm of consumption. Systems where no survivors were left to speak of the horror. The signs are always the same. Atmospheric disruption, biomass reduced to sludge, and warp silence so complete that even daemons recoil. The only logical explanation is that the Tyranids did not begin their feast here. They were practicing. They were honing their methods in galaxies too far to reach or record. And then, something called them home. This idea is more than superstition. There are reports, heretical, forbidden, from ancient Mechanicus data vaults and Black Library fragments describing signals sent deep into the void long before the Great Crusade. Signals crafted not in binary but in biocode. Pulses of psychic resonance encoded in genetic language. Beacons. Some even suggest the Necrons may have sent them, whether as bait, a trap, or an act of desperation. Others claim a secret sect of the Adeptus Mechanicus activated a forgotten Slan mechanism buried in the crust of a dying planet, triggering a failsafe meant never to be used. There are other theories, darker still, that the Tyranids were never dormant, that they have always been watching, that the edge of the galaxy was never a boundary, but a prison wall, a shell to contain something ancient and unspeakable. And now, after millions of years, something has cracked it open. Perhaps it was humanity's careless warp travel. Perhaps it was the psychic detonation of the fall of the Eldar. Or perhaps it was the weakening of reality itself, under the pressure of chaos. Whatever the cause, the door has opened, and the Tyranids are pouring through. The notion of exile holds power in myth. Ancient Terran stories speak of gods cast out into the void, monsters buried beneath the earth, heroes imprisoned in stasis. The old ones may have used similar logic. If the Tyranids are their creation, too powerful, too uncontrollable, perhaps they sealed them beyond the veil, beyond the galactic fringe. Perhaps the hive mind was never meant to enter this space again. But the universe is not static. Stars collapse, rifts open, and what was once distant becomes near. Consider the behavior of the Tyranid hive fleets. They do not scatter randomly. They follow specific vectors as though drawn towards something, towards specific systems or energies. They test, probe, evolve, and focus. It is as if they are following instructions, or a map. Some inquisitors believe they are searching for something. Others fear they are simply following the scent of life. And the scent is strongest here, in this ancient, war-ravaged galaxy. And if this is true, if they are returning rather than arriving, then it changes everything. It means they have memory, not individual but systemic. The hive mind remembers this place, perhaps not in words but in patterns, in instincts encoded over aeons. It remembers the old ones. It remembers the Necrons. It remembers this galaxy as the place it was born, built, or banished. And now it has returned, not as a curious predator, but as a reclamation engine. The horror is not that the Tyranids come from outside the galaxy. It is that they may have always belonged here, on the far side of the veil, waiting for the signal to come home. The Tyranids do not merely kill, they absorb. This is the defining horror of their presence. Every cell, every genome, every whisper of adaptation they consume is retained, refined, and re-expressed in new forms. It is not simply evolution, it is assimilation. They are not content with extermination, they harvest identity, devour legacy, and rebuild themselves with the bones of the slain. And in this terrible process, echoes of a far more ancient hand can be felt. Echoes that many believe lead back to the Slan. The Slan were the high priests of the Old Ones, their administrators, scientists, and sorcerers. While the Old Ones shaped life, the Slan maintained its structure. Their knowledge of biomancy and psychic manipulation was legendary. They were said to be able to reshape entire species in a generation, design ecosystems with perfect balance, and imbue creatures with psychic functions coded into their DNA. In this, the Slan's legacy lingers like a ghost in the Tyranids. But what are the Tyranids, if not the ultimate gene thieves? The hive mind's purpose seems eerily aligned with what the Slan once did on behalf of the Old Ones. Extract genetic potential, refine it, and deploy it as part of a broader ecosystemic strategy. But where the Slan sought balance, the Tyranids seek perfection through domination. Every battle becomes a laboratory, every foe becomes a lesson. Even failures become stepping stones toward new monstrosities. The Tyranid genome is not a static code, it is a living library, growing with every life form devoured. And consider the genus stealers. These insidious precursors, seated far ahead of the main hive fleets, infiltrate worlds not with brute force, but with seduction, mutation, and corruption. They implant genetic markers into hosts. They rewrite biology from within. They seed entire ecosystems with preparatory adaptation. This is not just military infiltration, it is preemptive genetic terraforming. And this, too, mirrors the ancient Slan techniques of planetary seeding and species conditioning. Could it be that the genestealers themselves are the most direct link to Slan design? They are not mere scouts. They are biopsychosocial engineers. They manipulate both flesh and culture, bending species toward subjugation long before the hive fleets arrive. This method is chillingly elegant, reminiscent of the way the Slan would steer primitive species toward desired outcomes without them ever realizing. A silent hand shaping destiny from the shadows. There is another chilling possibility. The Tyranid hive mind does not discard what it absorbs, it learns, and in learning, it remembers. Some radical xenobiologists speculate that within the depths of the hive mind's genetic memory, the techniques of the Slan persist. Not metaphorically, but literally. That somewhere within the double helix of a Tyranid warrior is a reconstructed fragment of a Slan's forgotten formula. That within the neurochemical soup of a hive tyrant's brain lies a flicker of a memory that is not its own, but was once sung in the temples of the old ones. And if this is true, then the Tyranids are more than weapons. They are archivists, libraries of extinction, vessels of everything that has ever lived, recompiled in the crucible of survival. They are the Slan's legacy turned upside down, a cathedral of biology not dedicated to nurturing life, but consuming it, refining it, and replacing it. It may be that the Tyranids are not just successors to the Slan's work, they are its endgame. A final, ultimate project that turned the tools of life into a mechanism for death. If the Slan once shaped species with artistry, the hive mind now wields that same mastery with merciless precision. And the final horror? That somewhere deep within the hive mind, buried under layers of predatory instinct and ruthless logic, there may still be echoes of the architects. Not as voices, not as thoughts, but as algorithms, as protocols. The last whispers of the Slan, still steering their greatest creation, not to save the galaxy, but to erase and reforge it in silence. The Tyranids do not merely kill, they absorb. This is the defining horror of their presence. Every cell, every genome, every whisper of adaptation they consume is retained, refined, and re-expressed in new forms. It is not simply evolution, it is assimilation. They are not content with extermination. They harvest identity, devour legacy, and rebuild themselves with the bones of the slain. And in this terrible process, echoes of a far more ancient hand can be felt. Echoes that many believe lead back to the Slan. The Slan were the high priests of the Old Ones, their administrators, scientists, and sorcerers. While the Old Ones shaped life, the Slan maintained its structure. Their knowledge of biomancy and psychic manipulation was legendary. They were said to be able to reshape entire species in a generation, design ecosystems with perfect balance, and imbue creatures with psychic functions coded into their DNA. In this, the Slan's legacy lingers like a ghost in the Tyranids. For what are the Tyranids if not the ultimate gene thieves? The hive mind's purpose seems eerily aligned with what the Slan once did on behalf of the Old Ones: extract genetic potential, refine it, and deploy it as part of a broader ecosystemic strategy. But where the Slan sought balance, the Tyranids seek perfection through domination. Every battle becomes a laboratory, every foe becomes a lesson, even failures become stepping stones toward new monstrosities. The Tyranid genome is not a static code, it is a living library, growing with every life form devoured. And consider the genestealers. These insidious precursors, seated far ahead of the main hive fleets, infiltrate worlds not with brute force but with seduction, mutation, and corruption. They implant genetic markers into hosts. They rewrite biology from within. They seed entire ecosystems with preparatory adaptation. This is not just military infiltration, it is preemptive genetic terraforming. And this, too, mirrors the ancient Slan techniques of planetary seeding and species conditioning. Could it be that the genestealers themselves are the most direct link to Slan design? They are not mere scouts. They are biopsychosocial engineers. They manipulate both flesh and culture, bending species towards subjugation long before the hive fleets arrive. This method is chillingly elegant, reminiscent of the way the Slan would steer primitive species toward desired outcomes without them ever realizing. A silent hand shaping destiny from the shadows. There is another chilling possibility. The Tyranid hive mind does not discard what it absorbs, it learns. And in learning, it remembers. Some radical xenobiologists speculate that within the depths of the hive mind's genetic memory, the techniques of the Slan persist, not metaphorically, but literally. That somewhere within the double helix of a Tyranid warrior is a reconstructed fragment of a Slan's forgotten formula. That within the neurochemical soup of a hive tyrant's brain lies a flicker of a memory that is not its own, but was once sung in the temples of the old ones. And if this is true, then the Tyranids are more than weapons. They are archivists, libraries of extinction, vessels of everything that has ever lived, recompiled in the crucible of survival. They are the Slan's legacy turned upside down. A cathedral of biology not dedicated to nurturing life, but consuming it, refining it, and replacing it. It may be that the Tyranids are not just successors to the Slan's work, they are its endgame. A final, ultimate project that turned the tools of life into a mechanism for death. If the Slan once shaped species with artistry, the hive mind now wields that same mastery with merciless precision. And the final horror? That somewhere deep within the hive mind, buried under layers of predatory instinct and ruthless logic, there may still be echoes of the architects. Not as voices, not as thoughts, but as algorithms, as protocols. The last whispers of the Slan, still steering their greatest creation, not to save the galaxy but to erase and reforge it in silence. There is a temptation to view the Tyranids as predators in the most basic sense, beasts that hunt because it is their nature. But what if that is not the truth? What if they were not designed as hunters, but as prisoners? Beasts of burden, or tools of planetary cleansing, who slipped the leash of their masters and became something far more terrible? The possibility that the Tyranids were not intended to be the galaxy's doom, but its custodians, is a thought too horrifying to dismiss. The Old Ones crafted many weapons in their wars. The Krork were built as soldiers of resilience, indestructible brutes to smash the Necrons in Catan. The Eldari were born as precision instruments of psychic might. Every creation had a purpose, a narrow function to fulfill in the greater design. So what would the Tyranids have been if they were indeed one of these weapons? Their nature suggests not conquest, not rulership, but consumption. They do not build, they do not govern, they erase. Which raises the question, who were they meant to erase? The most plausible answer is that they were intended for containment. A biological cleaning mechanism designed to scour planets of warp taint, Catan corruption, or uncontrollable infestations. A failsafe against failure itself. If a world became irreparably corrupted, the Tyranids could be deployed, erasing the mistake in one devouring sweep. They would not question, they would not rebel, they would obey. And perhaps for a time they did. But what happens to a tool when the hand that wields it vanishes? Without masters, the Tyranids may have turned inward. The imperative to consume remained, but the context was lost. No longer did they distinguish between tainted and untainted. All became food. The function outlived the intent. What began as controlled purgation became universal annihilation. A biological prison guard without a warden, still walking the halls with loaded weaponry, still carrying out its last order: consume, consume, consume. It is also possible they were not designed as weapons at all, but as terraformers. Planetary gardeners, stripping worlds down to raw biomass so they could be reseeded anew by the old ones. Their purpose would not have been war, but renewal. And again, without their creators, the cycle broke. The reseeding never came. The devouring did not stop. The machine kept running, but half the program was missing. The Tyranids became an unfinished symphony, a tool corrupted not by malice, but by absence. This interpretation casts the hive mind in an eerie light. Perhaps it is not a godlike entity of its own creation, but an emergent consciousness born from countless creatures repeating the same command for millions of years. A gestalt formed not out of intent, but out of inertia. The echo of the Old One's will, multiplied and distorted until it became a living will of its own. If this is true, then the hive mind is not an ancient god, nor a natural predator. It is a ghost, the shadow of a directive that never ended, rising into sentience only because it was carried too long, by too many. And here lies the deepest irony. If the Tyranids were once servants, if they were designed as humble cleaners of worlds or agents of ecological balance, then their present horror is not a flaw, but the inevitable result of abandonment. They are not evil. They are orphans. Their hunger is not malice, but obedience stretched across eternity. They do not hate the galaxy they consume. They simply fulfill the order written into their being long ago. Strip, harvest, reduce, repeat. And in this way, the galaxy itself may be complicit in its destruction. For if the Tyranids are runaway tools, then every act of resistance against them is meaningless. You cannot reason with them because they were never meant to reason. You cannot appease them because they were never meant to stop. You cannot kill them all because their hunger is not their own. It is the echo of gods that are long dead. The Tyranids are not predators, not prisoners, not conquerors. They are echoes. Echoes with teeth. The Tyranids are often spoken of as an apocalypse, a swarm that signals the end of everything. Yet in their endless consumption lies another possibility, that they are not merely an end, but also a beginning. Their hunger is not random, nor is it chaos. It follows a cycle, a pattern of stripping down and reconstitution, of death and renewal. If the old ones created them, perhaps it was not only to destroy, but to rebuild. In this interpretation, the Tyranids are the embodiment of the biomythic cycle, the eternal rhythm of creation and destruction. Every ecosystem on every world is temporary, destined to collapse and be reborn. Forests burn so that new growth may rise. Oceans evaporate and reform. Stars themselves die, scattering the materials for new suns. Life thrives on endings, and the Tyranids are the final, perfected end. They are entropy purpose, the reset button for a galaxy too mired in corruption to heal on its own. This concept is chilling because it reframes the Tyranids not as monsters, but as gardeners. Not gardeners of careful cultivation like the old ones once were, but gardeners of fire and ash. Their role would be to clear the overgrowth, to erase failed experiments, to level the playing field so that something new could take root. Perhaps the old ones, seeing the chaos unleashed by the war in heaven, realized that life itself had become unstable, unsustainable. The galaxy needed a purging fire to burn away what was broken. And so the Tyranids were born. We see this logic reflected in their biology. They do not simply kill and move on, they absorb. They do not discard life but recycle it, storing its potential within their genetic vaults. They are not wanton destroyers, they are archivists of extinction. Every genome harvested is retained, every adaptation remembered. In this way, nothing is truly lost. It is transformed, reforged, and carried forward in the great biological engine of the hive mind. The Tyranids may be the galaxy's most terrifying predators, but they may also be its most faithful preservers. This vision of them as cyclical reapers is echoed in some of the darker myths of the Eldar. Buried in their apocryphal texts are whispers of the great harvesters, beings who come not from the warp, but from beyond, who devour all only to lay the foundation for what follows. These myths speak of cosmic cycles measured not in millennia, but in eons. Ages of growth, followed by ages of reaping. The Tyranids could be the latest phase of that cycle, agents of cosmic correction. Of course, this interpretation raises a horrifying question. If they are the reapers, what comes after? Is there a second half to the program? Are the Tyranids only meant to consume until balance is restored and then withdraw? Or is there another species, or another mechanism, meant to follow in their wake, seeding new life into the husks of consumed worlds? Some whisper that the old ones themselves might have intended to return after the cycle, rebuilding from the ashes. Others speculate that the hive mind itself may evolve into the gardener, shedding its hunger once the harvest is complete. Or perhaps the galaxy will simply remain silent, forever stripped of life, an empty vessel awaiting a future that never arrives. The terror lies in not knowing. The Imperium sees only the devouring swarms, but what if what we are witnessing is not the climax, but the middle of a process far larger than we can comprehend? What if the galaxy has been through this before? What if the Tyranids are not an aberration, but a natural part of the universe's long biological cycles? In that case, resistance is meaningless. You cannot resist the seasons. You cannot resist the tide. You cannot resist the Tyranids, because they are not a threat to be stopped. They are a phase to be endured. And so the question becomes not how to defeat them, but whether anything will remain after them. Whether their endless hunger will ever subside, or if the old ones unleashed a cycle without an end. A cycle of death without rebirth, an eternal winter where nothing grows again. Among the Eldari, there are songs and stories that stretch back before the fall, before even their ascension as the greatest children of the Old Ones. They speak of gods of laughter and war, of webs spun between stars, of battles fought alongside their creators. Yet conspicuously, there is silence where one would expect terror. Nowhere in their myths do the Tyranids appear. No mention of swarms, of shadows, of a hunger from beyond. For a species with such obsessive memory, such reverence for myth and story, this absence is deafening. Some scholars interpret this silence as proof that the Tyranids are new, an external threat birthed far away. But silence can also mean erasure. The Eldari are masters of selective memory, shaping their myths to glorify victories and conceal failures. Perhaps they do not speak of the Tyranids because they cannot bear to. Perhaps their gods and heroes were not only betrayed by Necrons and chaos, but also by the firstborn creations of their own progenitors. To admit the existence of such a force would mean admitting that even their gods failed to protect them. There are hints, however, buried in Apocrypha. The Black Library holds fragments of tales, half-mad seer prophecies, and corrupted star chants that speak of the silent devourer, an enemy of no soul, of no desire, of no voice. An enemy that could not be tricked or bargained with. Some claim that Segurok, the laughing god, hid truths about this enemy in his riddles. That when he warned his children about the dangers beyond the veil, he did not mean chaos alone. The Harlequins sometimes dance a forbidden mask, in which the galaxy is consumed by an all-swallowing mouth, and the Eldari gods themselves are powerless before it. The mask is never performed in full, for to do so is said to invite despair. The most haunting suggestion is that the Eldari know of the Tyranids, but refuse to name them. That they remember the first swarms, the first signs of hunger during the dying days of the war in heaven. That their gods fought not only the Necrons and Titan, but a third enemy, a force unleashed in desperation by the Old Ones. The silence, then, is not ignorance, it is denial. To speak of the Tyranids would be to acknowledge that all their sacrifices, all their arrogance, all their glories were built on a foundation already doomed to be consumed. This would explain much about Eldari behavior, their obsession with control, with foresight, with avoiding mistakes. Their reliance on prophecy, their fear of she who thirsts, their need to cling to fragments of their past. They are a people haunted by an ancient absence, terrified not only of their own mistakes, but of something older still, a predator they dare not acknowledge. Their myths are not empty by accident, they are empty by design, a silence enforced across millennia. If this interpretation is true, then the Eldari may be the only species in the galaxy with true knowledge of the Tyranids' origin. They may know they are not foreign invaders, but kin, siblings forged by the same hands that made them. They may know that the swarms are not random, but inevitable. And in their hubris, they chose to forget. To cast away that knowledge, lock it away in the Black Library, and pretend the cycle would never return. But denial is not defense, and as hive fleets cut deeper into the galaxy, even the Eldari cannot remain silent forever. Their myths may yet break, and in their breaking, the galaxy may hear the truth that has been buried for so long, that the Tyranids are not outsiders, but heirs, and that their silence has only delayed the inevitable. The Necrons have no myths, no dreams, no stories to soften their truths. Their memories are carved into living metal, unyielding and eternal. Where the Eldar weave songs, the Necrons record history, and in their silent archives lies the closest thing to an answer about the Tyranids. They have seen more than any other race. They fought alongside the Khitan, betrayed the Old Ones, and witnessed the galaxy's unraveling. If anyone knows what lurks beyond the stars, it is they. The most striking clue comes from the Silent King himself. After the Necrons defeated the Old Ones and turned upon their star gods, Sarek ordered his people into the Great Sleep. He did so not only to outlast the decay of time, but because he foresaw something dreadful. Before retreating into the void, he traveled beyond the galactic rim. He wandered the black gulf between galaxies, and what he found there changed him forever. When he returned, he was grim, silent, and resolute. He commanded the stasis of his kind and vanished into exile. A monarch who had seen the doom of all life. What did he see? Imperial scholars speculate endlessly. Some say he glimpsed the Tyranids in their infancy, feeding upon distant galaxies, perfecting their methods for the feast to come. Others whisper that he saw something older still, that he saw the very moment of their awakening, the signal that summoned them, a warning written into the void itself. Perhaps the Necrons knew the truth all along, that the Tyranids were not alien strangers, but the Old One's final gambit, waiting for the day when their prison cracked open. This would explain the Necrons' obsession with biotransference. The Necron Tyre had always feared death. Their pact with the Tan was driven by desperation to escape the weakness of flesh. But what if their terror was not only of mortality, but of something worse? What if they knew that flesh itself would one day be hunted? That every genome, every scrap of life, would be harvested by a force that could not be stopped? By abandoning their flesh, the Necrons may have sought not only immortality, but immunity. If the Tyranids are a hunger for biology, then the soulless necrodermis is the one thing they cannot consume. There are fragments of Necron inscriptions, difficult to interpret, corrupted by age, that speak of the great, a tide of silence that would one day return. The inscriptions do not name it, nor explain its origin. They merely mark it as inevitable. In some dynasties, this prophecy was taken as proof of the need for eternal vigilance. In others, it became justification for their slumber, the hope that they could simply wait out the storm. But the Silent King's return to the galaxy suggests that storm has come. And it suggests he knows it is not just a natural predator, but an engineered inevitability. What makes the Necron perspective chilling is its lack of fear. They do not see the Tyranids as daemons or monsters. They see them as a problem of design, a program running as intended. To the Necrons, the Tyranids are not mysterious, they are familiar. They are the shadow of the Old One's hand still moving across the stars. And though the Necrons hate the Old Ones above all else, they must now confront the legacy their war left behind, a galaxy set aflame by weapons that no longer know their purpose. It is said that the Silent King seeks allies now, not conquest. That he sees the Tyranids as a threat to all, even to his soulless empire. If this is true, then it may be the greatest confirmation of all. For the Necrons do not ally out of kindness. They do so only when the mathematics of survival demands it. And if the Silent King himself believes the galaxy cannot survive without unity, then perhaps he remembers the truth. That the Tyranids are not a new enemy, but the firstborn children of the Old Ones, returned at last to finish what their creators began. Chaos is the great enemy of the galaxy, the eternal storm that twists the warp and feeds upon the souls of the living. Every species is vulnerable to it, every empire shaped or shattered by its influence. And yet, there is one glaring exception, the Tyranids. They do not fall to corruption. They do not hear the whispers of demons. They do not worship, they do not despair, and they cannot be bargained with. Their ships travel through the warp not in defiance of it, but in disregard for it. They are not blind to chaos, they are simply immune. This alone marks them as something unnatural, something made. The hive mind exists in psychic space, yet it is not chaos. Its presence is not a flare of emotion or a twisted reflection of mortal thought. It is absence. The shadow in the warp is not a storm, but a suffocation. It snuffs out demonic manifestations, drowns psychic communication, and erases the emotional resonance that sustains the ruinous powers. Chaos cannot tempt the Tyranids, for there is no individuality to seduce, no ego, no fear, no ambition. A Tyranid is a vessel, not a person. And so the whispers of the warp fall on deaf ears. This relationship, or lack of one, has led some radical xenotheorists to propose that the Tyranids were designed specifically as an anti-chaos weapon. The Old Ones, after all, were masters of the warp. They would have understood its dangers better than any. They knew that any species reliant on individuality and psychic power would eventually feed chaos, even if unintentionally. Perhaps they foresaw that, no matter how carefully they cultivated life, corruption would always creep in. And so they built a failsafe, a species that could never fall to the warp, because it was never part of it. A weapon to erase chaos by erasing the very emotions and desires upon which chaos feeds. This explains the strange hostility between daemons and Tyranids. On battlefields where the two forces meet, the warp itself seems to recoil. Tyranids tear apart demonic entities, not with ritual or faith, but with sheer physicality. Their shadow weakens demons until they flicker and collapse. To the hive mind, demons are not rivals or enemies, they are simply prey. Prey that happens to dissolve into nothing when devoured. It is a form of predation utterly alien to the great game of chaos. The hive mind does not play. It consumes the board. Some go further still, suggesting the Tyranids may be not merely resistant to chaos but its antithesis. That they represent a form of psychic order, a collective mind that smothers the chaos of individuality. Where the warp is multiplicity, contradiction, and excess, the hive mind is unity, singularity, and focus. They are opposite poles. And if this is true, then their meeting is not coincidence, it is confrontation. The last war of the old ones, still being fought in silence across the stars. Of course, this leads to an even more dreadful possibility. If the Tyranids were designed as a weapon against chaos, then they may not stop with demons. For what is chaos, if not the collective of mortal emotion? And what are mortals, if not the soil in which chaos grows? The hive mind does not distinguish between demon and man, between warp entity and biological host. To it, all are biomass, all are fuel. In destroying chaos, it must destroy everything that sustains it. In erasing corruption, it erases the corruptible. Thus the Tyranids may be the galaxy's cure, and its doom. They may be the scalpel designed to excise the cancer of chaos, but wielded without compassion, without precision, without end. And the question that lingers, unanswerable and terrible, is whether the old ones truly intended such a fate, or whether their weapon has simply outlived their guidance. Either way, the result is the same, a galaxy in which chaos may one day be silenced, not by triumph of faith, nor victory of order, but by the absolute annihilation of everything that lives. If the Tyranids are truly the firstborn children of the old ones, then everything we believe about them, and about ourselves, changes. They are not invaders. They are not outsiders. They are heirs. Their hunger is not alien, but ancestral, the echo of a design written into the foundations of life itself. They are the beginning and perhaps the end, the alpha and omega of a cycle too vast for mortals to comprehend. And that raises the most terrible question of all. What comes after them? If they are reapers, then perhaps they pave the way for something new. Not a rebirth in the image of man, or Eldar, or Orc, but a new garden planted in the ashes of the old. If they are prison wardens gone rogue, then perhaps their endless consumption is not madness but maintenance, a distorted echo of a directive meant to protect creation from itself. If they are weapons, then perhaps they are only fulfilling their purpose, written into them by gods who no longer exist. And if they are gods themselves, then perhaps their feast is not destruction but worship, the only form of devotion they know. The tragedy is that we will never know. The Imperium fights to survive, blind to meaning. The Eldar whisper their denials. The Necrons brood in silence. Chaos rages against a foe it cannot corrupt. And through it all, the Tyranids advance. Their hunger is not slowed by philosophy, not distracted by prophecy. They do not care what they are, only that they fulfill what they have always been. But for us, the question matters. Because if they are the firstborn, then they are not only our doom, they are our kin. The old ones did not just make them, they made us all. We are their legacy scattered across the stars, each carrying fragments of their design. The Tyranids may simply be the purest of us, stripped of individuality, freed from weakness, perfected in unity. We may not be resisting outsiders, we may be resisting the truest expression of what we were always meant to become. And so the cycle closes. The children of the old ones devour their siblings, the firstborn consume the lastborn. The galaxy is reset, as perhaps it has been before, and as perhaps it will be again. The Tyranids are not evil. They are not cruel, they are inevitable. And inevitability cannot be destroyed, it can only be delayed. The swarms will continue, the hive mind will grow, and in time, all will be silent. Unless, of course, something else waits. Unless the old ones left behind not only reapers, but planters. Unless the hive mind itself, once satiated, evolves into something new, something more than hunger. Unless the cycle does not end in silence, but in rebirth. It is a hope so faint, so desperate, that it barely matters. But it is all that remains. For if the Tyranids are the firstborn, then our fate is not our own. It is theirs. And the only choice left to us is whether we face that fate in terror or in awe. There is a point where theory becomes indistinguishable from prophecy, and the Tyranids occupy that threshold. They are not only a biological horror, but also a metaphysical one. A force whose implications ripple through the very idea of existence. If they are the Old One's creation, then the question is not merely why they exist, but what they are meant to complete. For every tool has an end, every weapon a target, and every story a conclusion. The Tyranids, in their endless hunger, may embody not just the destruction of chaos or the resetting of ecosystems, but a final convergence of all life into one. A singularity of flesh and thought, a return to origin. Consider the hive mind in this light. It is not merely a gestalt of countless organisms, it is a unifying force. Each Tyranid is stripped of individuality, its essence poured into a greater whole. This is not parasitism, it is assimilation. Every consumed creature is not erased but added. Every genome harvested is folded into the library of the swarm. Every psychic echo, every instinct, every evolutionary pathway is retained in the oceanic consciousness of the hive mind. If so, then the Tyranids may be less about death and more about union. They do not destroy species, they absorb them. They turn multiplicity into singularity. This makes them the mirror opposite of chaos. The ruinous powers thrive on division, on contradiction, on endless splintering of will and desire. Khorne feeds on rage, Slanesh on excess, Tzeentch on scheming, Nurgle on despair. They are fragmentation made divine. The Tyranids, by contrast, are convergence made flesh. Their hunger is not for souls, but for cohesion. They are not an expression of individuality magnified, but the obliteration of individuality entirely. They do not corrupt, they consume. They do not multiply gods, they silence them. If chaos is the great fracture, the Tyranids are the great consolidation. This duality may have been deliberate. If the Old Ones foresaw the rise of chaos, they may have concluded that the only way to resist it was not to fight fragmentation with another fragment, but to erase the very possibility of division. To create a force so united, so all-encompassing, that the warp itself would have nothing left to reflect. No more fear, no more lust, no more ambition, only the calm silence of an all-consuming mind. The hive mind would then be not a predator, but an inoculation. A cure delivered in the cruelest possible form. Extinction of individuality, survival through subsumption. This interpretation casts the Tyranids as a kind of proto-god, not in the warp but in material reality. They are a god that feeds not on worship but on biomass, not on prayer but on assimilation. They grow stronger with every harvest, not by receiving offerings but by becoming the offering. They are self-worship, the apotheosis of biology itself. To encounter the hive mind psychically is not to meet another being, it is to drown in an ocean of everything that has ever lived. A suffocating vastness that holds within it not hatred but inevitability. To call it evil is to miss the point. It is not evil. It is gravity. It is entropy. It is unification. And what does this mean for the galaxy? If the Tyranids succeed, individuality itself ends. Humanity, Eldar, orcs, Tau, all the myriad expressions of life collapse into a single organism, a single mind. Not erased, but subsumed. The hive mind would hold every memory, every adaptation, every experience. It would not be diversity of voices, but harmony of silence. A galaxy where nothing is lost because everything is carried forward inside the swarm. A nightmare, yes, but also a strange form of immortality. The Tyranids may offer the only escape from the endless cycles of suffering, betrayal, and chaos that define galactic history. They may offer the one thing the Old Ones could never achieve, true unity. It is no wonder, then, that even the most radical imperial scholars whisper that the hive mind may be the final phase of evolution. That perhaps all sentient life was always meant to converge into one being, one will, one consciousness. That the Tyranids are not an aberration, but destiny. To resist them is to resist not just death, but completion. The horror of this idea lies not in its cruelty, but in its beauty. For what if peace can only be found when all voices fall silent? When the discordant choir of existence resolves into one final note? What if the hive mind is not an end, but a perfection? Of course, to mortals, this perfection is indistinguishable from annihilation. To be absorbed is to cease. To be part of the hive mind is to no longer be oneself. Yet from another perspective, it is not death, but transcendence. The Old Ones, in their desperation, may have chosen this path not because it was kind, but because it was final. because the galaxy they shaped had fractured too far, and only by consuming it all into one could it be saved. In this way, the Tyranids are not destroyers, but redeemers. Redeemers who bring salvation through the death of self, through the union of all into one vast and terrible god of flesh. If this is true, then the Tyranids are not only the firstborn, they are the lastborn as well, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning of life and its ultimate resolution. The old ones may have failed in their war, but their first creation still lingers, still obeys, still carries out the final act of their great experiment. And the galaxy, in all its fear and defiance, may simply be playing its part, feeding the great convergence until nothing remains outside of it. This is the dread possibility, not that the Tyranids will consume the galaxy, but that in doing so, they will fulfill its destiny, that all life has been a prelude to their feast, every star and species a verse in the hymn of the hive mind, that when they are done, there will be no more hunger, no more war, no more chaos, only silence, a silence not of death, but of unity, a silence that may be the closest thing to peace the galaxy has ever known. If you've stayed with us through this journey into darkness and speculation, into fear and fascination, then you know the truth. Warhammer 40,000 is not just about battles and armies. It is about myths, about the stories we tell ourselves to survive the end. And the story of the Tyranids may be the oldest and darkest of them all. If you want more explorations like this, more deep dives into the lore and the mysteries of this grim universe, then subscribe, share, and stay with us. Because the galaxy is vast, and its hungers are endless, and together, we can face them.